Hello and welcome to Views on News. I'm Jawad. Tehami. Pakistan's Prime Minister Mohammad Shehbaz Sharif has visited the rain and flood affected area of Gwadar and announced the monetary compensation for the affected people in that particular area. Also, while talking to the affected people in Gwadar, the Prime Minister said the federal government will utilize all the available resources in order to help the affected people of Balochistan and Gwadar, which have been hit by rains and a flood. At this particular moment, Chief Minister of Balochistan, Mir Sarfraz Bugti, was also present along with the Prime Minister. Also, the Prime Minister directed the authorities to form a robust system for advanced detection of natural calamities using modern technology and satellites also. Now, Pakistan has witnessed intense and heavy rains in the recent days that have actually caused difficulty in the lives of people in many areas of the country, making the authorities alert in key regions of the country. Also, we know for a fact that back in summer 2022, Pakistan witnessed floods of epic proportion, and that particular calamity rendered huge damages and destruction to the life and the property and the economy of the country also. Although Pakistan happens to be one of the least contributors in the carbon emissions globally, yet has to bear the brunt of the climate change. And these climate-induced phenomenon and associated disasters and risks, particularly when we talk about those epic floods of 2022, Pakistan happens to be vulnerable to these climate-induced phenomenon and disasters. Now, according to Global Climate Risk Index, Pakistan is the 8th most vulnerable to climate crisis. Now, after these floods of summer 2022, Pakistani authorities spearheaded a campaign at the international level. At the COP27 and COP28, there was approval and the establishment of the Loss and Damage Fund. Also, in response to these floods of summer 2022, Pakistan's authorities came up with a 4R framework that happens to be a resilient recovery, rehabilitation and reconstruction framework. Also, the authorities formulated a national adaptation plan back in 2023, which plans out the adaptation strategy and priorities in key 7 areas that include the agriculture, water nexus, natural capital, urban resilience, human capital, disaster risk management, and gender and youth and social inclusion. I will be in today's program talking about the climate change and the vulnerability of Pakistan to climate-induced phenomenon, risks and disasters. What needs to be done as far as the Pakistani authorities are concerned? What sort of strategies and priorities should be formulated, and how those could be implemented in order to mitigate the adverse impacts of climate change? For that, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Abdullah Deol. He is water expert. Mr. Deol, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Also in the studio, we are honored to have been joined by Mr. Ahmed, is climate change expert. Mr. Ahmed, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. On Skype at the same time, we are honored to have been joined by Mr. Jawad Ali Khan. He is UN Habitat Country Program Manager and former Director General of Ministry of Climate Change. Mr. Khan, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Both of you gentlemen, allow me, let me begin the discussion with Mr. Jawad Ali Khan. Mr. Khan, we haven't seen rains in the past on such a massive scale when it comes to this particular part of the year, when the spring is there, and this particular month of March. Now, this time around, it's been a very different pattern of heavy rain all across the country, from north to south, actually making the life of the countrymen very difficult, also making the authorities come on alert in key regions. Is it a manifestation of climate change?
Thank you very much for having us with you. And the Meteorological Department of the Government of Pakistan has the weather stations and they do share the data, and they do predict the behavior of the uh, uh, rainfall, as well as the intensity and the frequency of the rainfall. So these arrangements are in place. But the very phenomena of climate change, it has a very peculiar characteristics. It cannot be perfectly or 100% assessed, because the climate change phenomena itself is called erratic, as well as intense in its frequency, and so it is not so much predictable to the degree that you can mm, avoid the impact. The impact will be certainly there, but the preparedness or the level of preparedness or the approach that we have to adopt would make a difference. That how do we encounter and how do we face the calamities. So I believe that there is a lot that we need to put in place in terms of planning our settlements which are vulnerable, and you have to do it beforehand. And if such things are not adopted or does not exist, then these kind of phenomena will occur again and again, and will have this kind of impacts that we are seeing in the recent times. Thank you.
Right, Mr. Khan, now we've seen those floods of summer 2022, which actually brought in a lot of damage and destruction both to the life and the property as well as to the overall economic outlook of the country. Around $30 billion dollars of losses as a result of those epic floods. Now, ever since we have seen the Pakistani authorities not only being proactive locally but also internationally advocating Pakistan's case, despite Pakistan being one of the lowest and the least contributor in the carbon emissions, has to bear the brunt of the climate change. How do you analyze the strides and the efforts and the measures which have been put in by the authorities ever since?
Like you just said yourself, that the Prime Minister during his visit in Balochistan has indicated that we will use the modern and latest satellite technologies. So actually UN Habitat is on the ground in Sindh, and we have developed a climate resilient settlement plan, and we are chairing a technical working group on climate resilient settlement planning. So we have already launched the plan for the pilot settlement. It is in Dadu, and it comprises of 9 villages. So we have studied the very source and using all those modern technologies, that how the Dadu districts, or it is Kamangarh Deh and Kamangarh Deh, so that document is already there. We have demonstrated that how the most worst area which was hit in 2022 floods can be made resilient to and we hope we did it in 2010 as well. So in 2010 floods, UN Habitat did a resettlement plan in Thatta, and that withstood the impact of 2022 floods. Means that our areas which are badly affected or which are faced to these kind of consequences can be improved to the extent that it can sustain the shocks. So there is actually a need. We have shown the way forward. So now it is to be upscaled, and UN Habitat is ready, because our mandate is to work on the settlements and safety and sustainability of the human settlements, whether it is cities or towns or villages. So it is possible to do. So we need to engage with the local governments. We need to engage with the local administration. So we are not reinventing the wheel, but adopting the kind of mechanisms and methods that the world does adopt and try and succeeds in containing the extent of disasters. So it is possible. We are ready to do it, and we will do it once. I mean, it's a UN system, so one has to call and approach, and we will be certainly there. Thank you.
Right, Mr. Khan, please stay with us. Let me proceed with the discussion. Mr. Ahmed, now this particular new pattern of rain in the month of March causing devastation in various parts of the country, as well as making certain parts of the country more vulnerable. For example, Gawada, for instance, where Prime Minister had a visit today. Is it a manifestation of climate change? Is it a climate-induced phenomenon? If yes, what's required to deal with such phenomenon in the future?
Certainly, this is a climate-induced disaster, and we have been witnessing such kind of incidents way back 2010. So, after like 14 years, I really don't see such kind of measures that we had adopted. There are many strategies that we have. There are many policies that government of Pakistan has taken up, that they are inclusive and very technical in nature as well, and it has been developed over the years with the opinion, with the technical inputs of the experts. But unfortunately, we cannot take those policies and strategies to the grassroots level, one thing. Secondly, our early warning systems are not that adapt to the new changes that are happening. Way back 2014, Italian government installed two climate observatories, one at Deol, the other one was at K2 base camp. I was part of that initiative as well. But afterwards, what happened? And they were like handed over to Met Department and WAPDA, and data coming out of it should have been giving us some indications to early warnings. But I don't know if it is in place and the data is coming out, and if it is disseminated to the local level, then it should have been much less impact of the climate change. Though, as you mentioned, that we are eighth, among the 8. But I believe that we are maybe the 8th in terms of vulnerability, but in terms of impact that we have seen in the couple of years, we are the top 1-2 countries. They have been impacted. If we refer to the last years, or like 22 disasters, or the rain things, I believe that we are the top impacted
in terms
countries.
of impact.
Yeah, in terms of impact, because no country has so far faced like a $30 billion impact we did, and that is because of a couple of reasons. One, the policies and the strategies that were developed at the federal level with the inputs of provincial authorities and local authorities, but they are not translated into real time measures at the local level, or like they were not translated into some early warning systems, and basically we are still far behind in adaptation, though the climate change policy was developed maybe 15 years back, but still we are lagging behind. And the adaptation, the first adaptation policy draft was prepared maybe 10 years back, and then it was revised a couple of years back. but we don't have any adaptation plans on ground.
So, what about this national adaptation plan after the floods of summer 2022 that was formulated
it
back
has
in
been
20,
revised after
23?
the new data inducted in it and the hotspots were identified. So now, after identifying the hotspot, in fact, it shall be translated into the ground action at the ground.
Right.
So that is very important, and where the administration and the local governance comes in. But unfortunately, our people are not very much receptive to such kind of measures which comes to against to their wishes and whims or whatever. Because
you're talking about the local communities, their
local
reception.
communities, those who suffer. One,
I mean, the cognitive dissonance come into play, perhaps, and there happens to be a factor of the people not very much ready to get evacuated from their ancestral lands. Also, we've seen that particular instance happening in 2022 also after those massive floods. So when we specifically talk about the early warning systems, you already given the instance of there were 2 stations given by a foreign country. Now, with the passage of time, with the increasing frequency and the intensity of these climate-induced phenomenon, what's required to have the efficient early warning systems? And what can be done when we talk about Pakistan taking strides in that particular direction indigenously?
the first thing that I believe Pakistan government and maybe some Pakistan government organizations are on it. And first of all, we need to have satellite observatories basically. Observatories, climate observatories or weather predictions connected to the satellite imagery, and we need to study the entire weather patterns. They are changing over, they have changed over the years, and now what immediately coming out the impact of it, and what exactly the new pattern of weathers is in the region, and how the other patterns are impacting Pakistan, that we need to develop, and then we have to adapt accordingly. That, for example, March has been a spring month, but last year even Feb was hotter than what we expected, and it has been happening for several years till this Feb, and this Feb was like snowfall, and it was like the cold, one of the coldest months. And now March, and still we are facing like landslides and snow, and I don't know, like we had never witnessed such kind of March in our history. It means that we are facing the brunt of the changed weathers. Now we have to study the behavior of the new changes, and now we have to adapt accordingly. That if our winter season has expanded to like these years, to these months, and where is the spring, and now the
do you see, Mr. do you see any sort of a pattern, a pertinent, well sorted out pattern developing? As you mentioned, last year the month of February was hotter, and this time around we saw snowfall happening and massive rains happening, and it seems that winter is still there, right? So I mean, these patterns,
I'm not sure. The Met Office can answer this question, but my observation is that it's quite random. Like
so
for example,
if
it's
happening very randomly.
A couple of years back, we faced a heat wave in December in Karachi, and now they are having like coldest month in Karachi.
So what would be the efficacy of that data that would be gotten after that detailed study about the pattern? Because if the phenomenon are happening on very randomly, so what is going to be the use of that data? So
then
what's required? What else is required?
Jawad, but at least there could be a reference point. The weather data that we get, or at least if we have some systematic study of the changes through the climate observatories directly connected to the satellites, then I believe like at least we would have a little bit early warnings that in like coming days or maybe the coming months, what kind of weather we will be having. Then this data can also be used for changing your agriculture crops pattern. So, and you can also like predict and ask the communities to you know, evacuate from
How
certain
crucial
space.
that particular phenomenon of community awareness regarding these things happens to be. I'll come to you for your detailed understanding regarding that. Let me bring in Mr. Deol into the discussion also. Mr. Deol, when we talk about monsoon, the 2 months of July and August, we get that particular phenomenon here in the Indian subcontinent, particularly Pakistan. Now, in those particular 2 months, when there happens to be already very massive and heavy rainfall across the country, how does climate change actually exacerbate the intensity, the severity of those rainfalls? And what sort of impact climate change does generally have on the monsoon season here in Pakistan?
The thing is, if we talk about climate change, of course it exists, but there's also the management which doesn't exist. Unfortunately, right now, we haven't learned so far from our mistakes, which is quite saddened. Like you mentioned, there was a massive flood in 2022 in summer, and it was the same region, and now there's a flood in 2024 after 1.5 years, and there have been a lot of rehabilitation that had happened before. But when we look at those pictures...
But the months are very different.
Yeah, months are different, but we have the time for management. Okay, let's say if it was the same system, if we had the proper management, we had the proper drainage, the water might have a way to go. Because when we look at those pictures, if you look at them, I don't see any drainages there at all. There's no open drainage, there is no closed drainage. And what makes it more alarming for me is like water is the next hub. It's the game changer for Pakistan CPAC. If this is what's going to happen, I mean, I'm alarmed what the government is thinking, or the other relatable authorities, responsible authorities are thinking about managing the other parts of this country of Pakistan, because this is the most important right now. And we have actually not learned from our mistake. It had happened.
What about flash floods? I mean, even if you learn from your lesson, the lessons from your mistakes, or try to bring in the best of the management and try to bring in the best of the practices, what about the what about dealing with the flash floods?
I mean, yeah, sure.
Is there any proper mechanism to deal with flash floods?
Yes. So first you were asking about the monsoon. So of course,
firstly,
but now flash flood.
The impact of climate change on the overall monsoon pattern for Pakistan.
And the
since you said that there was no lesson learned as far as there was mismanagement.
Yes.
So a supplementary question related to that was, what about the flash floods? Even the best management is brought into practice. If the lessons are learned, what about dealing with the flash floods? Are they predictable?
Okay,
even if
so
the best management
let me put it this way. Let's say I have a big drainage, a big aquifer, which needs to be filled. It can be filled any time of the year. Let's say it rains a lot in January, I fill it up. February, I just open my outlet and let the water flow. For example, lessons were learned, I'm going to give you an example. Lessons were learned in Lahore. They made those aquifer. You probably know about those ground aquifers they have built there in the previous government during the CM Buzdar, I guess. And now the new government is thinking about expanding it, which is a great, obviously great step. So when they had made those things, the climate change impact on Lahore is less than the other cities. Of course there's climate change, nobody is denying that, but how we can reduce it? By readily prepared. So what we might have done for Gwadar, we might have made some drainages, we might have made some embankments, and we might have done some flood risk management, and we might have told the people, you know what, you're sitting in the extremely flash flood prone area, please just don't build the houses there. So when we were rebuilding and reconstructing those houses, so maybe instead of building here, I might have moved like a few meters or a few 100 feet, and I might have given them a safe and secure place. For example, here in Islamabad, it rains a lot, more than Gwadar. But we have a really great management system. We have big parks, we have those flood risk management zones, and we have not constructed those sectors where the water is going. But through where the water is going, we have those channels and the parks. So that's your answer. Yes, instead of 100, that with flash flooding, it might have been reduced to like 10 to 20% of the impact.
Right. Mr. Khan, you already talked about a particular case of 9 villages in Dadu district, which were made on the very principle of being climate resilient. Now, when we talk about climate resilience in particular, does it mean only that it relates to the strength of infrastructure, or are there any other factors which are included in resilience?
Yeah, in fact, actually, resilience is not just on infrastructure. It is taking into account all the drivers or all the factors that lead to the kind of consequences that we are facing. So, what is done is that the modern satellite imageries and the other GIS tools are available, by which we create layer of information, and one layer of information is overlaid over the other one. So finally what happens that you take into consideration all the factors and overlay one over the other, and then you see that which factor is impacting the very particular location. So I think my other colleagues have also mentioned about the factors that our preparedness or our level or our method of development is need to be aligned and streamlined to take into consideration our topography, our drainage pattern, our because I was listening to the statements that people were making when the Prime Minister visited Balochistan, Gwadar. They said that before the development took place, out or flash out of. But now what is happening that because of the urban development that is taking place, there is the drainage has been impacted. So in fact, mostly what we see that physical challenges or the physical constraints that we when we develop, we do not take into consideration the topography of a very particular place, the natural drainage system of that place. So what happens that the water does not get the outlet to pass through in a way that it should pass. So that is why these things are required to be built into the development system, or urban planning or rural planning or settlement planning is are the tools that needs to be applied at the local level to contain the damage and disasters that does occur again and again and again. So I mean, maybe if there is a more preparedness. What I see is on not the. I mean, the support is not towards containing the disasters, but towards providing the emergency services or emergency relief or that kind of thing. So our approach has to reverse and prepare. We need to more concentrate on the preparedness and at the local level, provincial level, national level. So that is actually lacking. It is doable. Actually, it is not strange. We can overcome, but we need to have long-term strategy, long-term plan, integrated, cohesive, and inclusive approach. So these things are possible, and hopefully the new government, because after all, when it is occurring very frequently, and the frequency is rather becoming lesser and lesser. So we will wake up and we will take appropriate measures, and it is doable. It is nothing that it cannot be done. We can overcome. We need to put in place on the ground the measures that are required to make the areas where people live more safe and sustainable in the manner that resilience is for all factors, not for one thing. The building is structured, if the building structure is sound, what will happen that it will still submerge underwater. But when the water recedes, it will come back again. But we need to take measures to not let the water rise so high that it submerge the settlements. So there are measures, there are technologies that the world is adopting and world is following. We need to have a continuous and coherent and long-term plan. Thank you.
Right, Mr. Khan, you already talked about the success of that particular case of 9 villages in the Dadu district. Now, you also talked about another project and the upscaling of it. So if this particular project already was a huge success, so what's required, what does it take to expand it on different levels? And what's required for upscaling of such projects which happen to be climate resilient?
In fact, a very comprehensive and a plan needs to be adopted. At least the need should be identified and experts put in place. Because out of our work in Sindh, because Sindh in 2022 was the most impacted. So the government of Sindh has now asked us, or they are planning, we did complete phase 1. So that was the pilot. So now they want to expand into 15 districts. So 15 districts are those districts which are very, very susceptible to the flooding impacts. So the approach, the roadmap has been already demonstrated. It does take into consideration all factors. It needs to be expanded. Similar kind of approach we can adopt in Balochistan, because what I think that has happened is that in the urban planning or the new development plan, these impacts have not been considered very well or built into the design of the new urban development plan, by which they are undertaking the development. Again, one thing that I had tried when I was in the ministry, that in the world, in the coastal areas, 300 meters from the sea, from the where the wave goes high water mark, 300 feet in the 300 meters inside remains in the original form. No development is allowed. Here, when I was in the ministry, I worked in the Caribbeans in West Indies, and they used to have, it is called Queen's Chain. That means that a strip of 300-meter wide strip from the coast of the sea is not allowed to go for any development. So I told my minister that now when we are developing Gwadar, let's declare it in the legislation that 300 meters from high water mark will remain free from any kind of construction. But my minister said that I failed, I could not do it. Means you have to be sensitive. There are ways to manage. So let's put in place the necessary instruments that safeguards these kind of, the impacts, such impacts that is occurring in our country. So we need to honestly wake up. We need to honestly put in place, even like the landslides, 10-degree slope in the world, there are prescriptions that you should not build at a very high elevation. There has to be a gradual so all buildings need to follow these regulations. All these instruments need to be developed, that how steep you can build a house. If you build at 90-degree angle, or if you build at 70-degree angle, then certainly the landslide will occur. So there has to be some kind of thought about what are the measures that the world has taken to contain landslides, to contain seawater intrusion, to contain many, many different challenges that we are facing. But since we have started to face again and again, I think our system will wake up and our system will take appropriate measures. The measures are already there. We don't have to honestly reinvent the wheel. We need to only adopt at the local level, identify our areas which are more threatened, which are more vulnerable. Because now what is happening, that people are building up to the, I mean, in the very, I mean, deep into the coastal areas or the river beds. So that has to be really contained. Otherwise, these impacts will have to will repeat itself.
Right, Mr. Khan. Now, the formulation of these instruments, the proper regulation by the concerned departments and the authorities, how crucial happens to be the community involvement and awareness as far as the implementation of such instruments is concerned?
Actually, let me quote you one example. We all live in Islamabad. In one flood, do you remember that the roads, the light and the cars were already, the engine was on and it was floating, it started floating in E11 in Islamabad. So what had happened, that the natural drainage pattern in the development of that sector was compromised. And what happened, that the water from the Margala hills, when it started gushing in the downstream, then it in the wink of an eye, it started overthrown all these structures, and even the running car on the road were floating on the water.
Right.
So these are eye openers. We need to see that even if we claim that our city is so planned and we are so proud of this city, but then just imagine that nature has shown us that what are we doing, and we need to wake up. So I believe that if we all remain focused, we will overcome these challenges, inshallah. Thank you.
Right. Of course, hopefully so. Mr. Khan, please stay with us. Now, Mr. Munir, the community involvement and community awareness already, that case, so people not being ready to be evacuated from the vulnerable areas despite early warning systems being there, authorities knocking at the doors, that association with their ancestral land also. How important is that? How to go about that, making the communities realize that this particular phenomenon is happening and the need to act with the authorities in tandem?
In fact, whatever policies are made in Pakistan, they are community inclusive. Like whatever provincial or local disaster or district disaster strategies or are prepared, they are inclusive of communities. But unfortunately, the community representatives come on board, but awareness part is also there. But the phenomena that you mentioned, that they are really don't bother about these things, and they everything put to Allah. Allah khair karega. But Allah khair kaise karega? Like if you stand in front of like fast moving vehicle and you will say Allah theek karega, Allah khair karega, to Allah khair nahi karega.
One has to put in the efforts. That's what you mean.
The God has given you some wisdom, and they also have asked you to think about the factors coming around yourself, and you have to accordingly prepare yourself. And this is, as Jawad Ali Khan Sahab said, that there is a policy that whatever the pathway of the water or the drain of the flash flood is, you have to construct anything 300 meters away. But if you put everything on the brink or between a river, तो फिर अल्लाह खैर नहीं करेगा, you know. So you cannot expect that everything will be fine, and it is happening again and again, and that is quite unfortunate that we don't learn even from the disasters. Though like as you earlier talked about the flash floods, yes, there are early warning systems. We can predict like a week, 10 days, 15 days before that what kind of rains are expected and what kind of havoc they can play. On the other hand, we also have whatever the flood early warning systems we have, we reach out to people. For example, like 15 days back, there was a prediction that on the weekend, the past weekend, Islamabad will have like heavy rains, and we had thunderstorm and everything. And it is on us, like if we care about those early warnings or not. And now the people has to take care of these things, and otherwise you will not be safe. And the more important is that the whatever climate resilient or sustainable urbanization strategies or policies that we have, it has to be translated into real time action on ground, and communities has to take care of whatever said by the authorities. The one thing more, our provincial governments are a little bit equipped with for the mitigation of disasters of such type, but at the district level, even at the hotspots, that we know that these are the hotspots, but they are not well equipped as far as we say like early warning, communication of the early warning systems, or the adaptation models that we talk about, or the mitigation measures. Mitigation measures are two types, like one is a preventive, that you have to immediately early warning system is one of the preventive measures, like, and the other one afterwards, what have they don't have such kind of emergency infrastructure.
Better collaboration and
better collaboration
is required for
important
that
between the authorities and the community groups.
Right.
That is very important. And now, for God's sake, communities has to understand, or we have to make them understand that it is in your interest of your life and livelihood and infrastructure, that you should
rightly
not
pointed out.
go beyond the limits.
Unfortunately, short of time. Very quickly, your closing comments. Pakistan happens to be the least contributor of carbon emissions globally, yet bears the brunt. We went to the international community. The United Nations Secretary General himself came and witnessed those super floods of summer 2022. Yeah. There were flash appeals made by the United Nations, the loss and damage fund spearheaded by Pakistan, and then a lot of pledges were made. What's required from the developed world, especially, who happen to be the major contributors of carbon emissions?
First of all the clean mechanism type funds shall not exist anymore. But this is what I believe. Like if I'm polluting and you do some good things, and I can buy your credits, and one thing. On the other hand, the carbon trading is a new phenomenon that came up, and I believe like it may, but end of the day, the developed world has to curtail their emissions, and they have to curtail their consumption as well. The third thing the developed world has to do, whatever commitment they make, they should fulfill their commitments. For example, the Green Climate Fund that came after, during the Paris Agreement, they did not fulfill. And after the loss and damage fund, whatever the commitments they made, so far we don't see any
the pledges must be fulfilled. Yeah. Those should be materialized. Also, the transition from the fossil fuels to renewables.
Renewable.
Mr. Munir Ahmed, climate change expert, thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Mr. Abdullah Deol, water expert, thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. And on Skype, we were joined by Mr. Jawad Ali Khan, UN Habitat Country Program Manager and former Director General of Ministry of Climate Change. Mr. Khan, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.